Polonization was the acquisition or imposition of elements of Polish culture, in particular the Polish language, as experienced in some historic periods by the non-Polish populations of territories controlled as substantially under the influence of Poland. As with other examples of cultural assimilation, it could either be voluntary or forced, and is most visible in the case of territories where the Polish language or culture were dominant, or where their adoption could result in increased prestige or social status, as was the case of the nobility of Ruthenia and Lithuania. To a certain extent, Polonization was also administratively promoted by the authorities, particularly in the period following World War II. Summary: Polonization can be seen as an example of cultural assimilation. Such a view is widely considered applicable to the times of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, when the Ruthenian and Lithuanian upper classes were drawn towards the more westernized Polish culture and the political and financial benefits of such a transition, as well as, sometimes, by the administrative pressure exerted on their own cultural institutions, primarily the Orthodox Church. The conversion to the Roman Catholic faith was often the single most important part of the process. For Ruthenians of the time, being Polish culturally and Roman Catholic by religion was almost the same. This aspect of Polonization that led to the diminishing of the Orthodox Church was the part that was most resented by the Belarusian and Ukrainian masses. In contrast, the Lithuanians, who were mostly Catholic, were in danger of losing the cultural identity as a nation, but that did not become evident for the wide masses of Lithuanians until the Lithuanian national renaissance in the middle of the 19th century. On the other hand, the Polonization policies of the Polish government in the interwar years of the 20th century were again twofold. Some of them were similar to the mostly forcible assimilationist policies implemented by other European powers that have aspired to regional dominance, while others resembled policies carried out by countries aiming at increasing the role of the native language and culture in their own societies. For Poles, it was a process of rebuilding Polish national identity and reclaiming Polish heritage, including the fields of education, religion, infrastructure and administration, that suffered under the prolonged periods of foreign occupation by the neighboring empires of Russia, Prussia, and Austria-Hungary. However, as a third of recreated Poland's population was ethnically non-Polish and many felt their own nationhood aspirations thwarted specifically by Poland, large segments of this population resisted to varying extents the policies intended to assimilate them. Part of the country's leadership emphasized the need for the ethnic and cultural homogeneity of the state in the long term. However, the promotion of the Polish language in the administration, public life and, especially, education, were perceived by some as an attempt at forcible homogenization. In areas inhabited by ethnic Ukrainians, for example, actions of the Polish authorities seen as aiming at restricting the influence of the Orthodox and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church caused additional resentment, and were considered to be closely tied to religious Polonization. 12th–16th centuries. Between the 12th and the 14th centuries, many towns in Poland adopted the so-called Magdeburg rights that promoted the town's development and trade. The rights were usually granted by the king on the occasion of the arrival of migrants. Some integrated with the larger community, such as merchants who settled there, especially Greeks and Armenians. They adopted most aspects of Polish culture but kept their Orthodox faith. Since the Middle Ages, Polish culture, influenced by the West, in turn radiated east, beginning the long and uneasy process of cultural assimilation. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the non-Polish ethnic groups, especially the Ruthenians and Lithuanians, found themselves under the strong pressure of Polish culture and language. The Polish influence in the regions began with the 1569 Union of Lublin, when many of the Ruthenian territories formerly controlled by the Grand Duchy of Lithuania were transferred to the Polish crown. In the climate of the colonization of sparsely populated Ruthenian lands by the Polish Polonized nobility and peasants from central Poland, persecution and even an attempted ban of the Eastern Orthodox Church in the Polish-controlled territories following the Union of Brest, which sought to convert the Ruthenian peasantry to Catholicism. The attractions and pressures of Polonization on Ruthenian nobility and cultural elite resulted in almost complete abandonment of Ruthenian culture, traditions and the Orthodox Church by the Ruthenian higher class. The Lithuanian Grand Duke Jogaila was offered the Polish crown and became Vladislav II Jagiello. This marked the beginning of the gradual, voluntary Polonization of the Lithuanian nobility. Jagiello built many churches in pagan Lithuanian land and provided them generously with estates, gave out the lands and positions to the Catholics, settled the cities and villages and granted the biggest cities and towns Magdeburg rights. The Ruthenian nobility was also freed from many payment obligations and the rights were equalized with those of the Polish nobility. Under Jogaila's successor as a king of Crown Vladislav III of Varna, that he had no power in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The Polonization, which earlier took place more by force than by other means, attained a certain degree of subtlety. Vladislav III introduced some more liberal reforms. He expanded the privileges to all Ruthenian nobles, irrespective of the religion, and in 1443 he signed a bull equalizing the Orthodox Church in rights with the Roman Catholicism, thus alleviating the relationship with the Orthodox clergy. These policies continued under the next king Casimir IV Jagiellon. Still, the mostly cultural expansion of the Polish influence continued since the Ruthenian nobility were attracted by both the glamour of the Western culture and the Polish political order, where the magnates became the unrestricted rulers of the lands and serfs in the vast estates. Some Ruthenian magnates like Sangisko, Wisniewicki and Kiziel resisted the cultural Polonization for several generations, with the Ostrogski family being one of the most prominent examples. Remaining generally loyal to the Polish state, the magnates, like Ostrogskis, stood by the religion of the forefathers, and supported the Orthodox Church generously by opening schools, printing books in Ruthenian language and giving generously to the Orthodox Church's construction. However, the resistance was gradually waning with each subsequent generation as more and more of the Ruthenian elite turned towards Polish language and Catholicism. Still, with most of the educational system getting Polonized and the most generously funded institutions being to the west of Ruthenia, the Ruthenian indigenous culture further deteriorated. In the Polish Ruthenia, the language of the administrative paperwork started to gradually shift towards Polish. By the 16th century, the language of administrative paperwork in Ruthenia was a peculiar mix of the older Church Slavonic with the Ruthenian language of the commoners and the Polish language. With the Polish influence in the mix gradually increasing, it soon became mostly like the Polish language superimposed on the Ruthenian phonetics. The total confluence of Ruthenia and Poland was seen coming, as the Eastern Rite Greek Catholic Church, originally created to accommodate the Ruthenian, initially Orthodox, nobility, ended up unnecessary to them as they converted directly into the Latin Rite Catholicism en masse. The Church largely became an hierarchy without followers. The Greek Catholic Church was then used as a tool aimed to split even the peasantry from the Ruthenian roots, still mostly unsuccessfully. The commoners, deprived of the native protectors, sought protection through the Cossacks, who, being fiercely orthodox, tended also to easily turn to violence against those they perceived as their enemies, particularly the Polish state and what they saw as its representatives, the Poles and generally the Catholics, as well as the Jews. After several Cossack uprisings, especially the fateful Khmelnytsky uprising, and foreign invasions, the Commonwealth, increasingly powerless and falling under the control of its neighbors, started to decline. The process, which eventually culminated with elimination of the Polish statehood in the end of the 18th century for the next 123 years. While the Commonwealth's Warsaw Compact is widely considered an example of an unprecedented religious tolerance for its time, the oppressive policies of Poland towards its Eastern Orthodox subjects is often cited as one of the main reasons that brought the state's demise. During all time of existing of Commonwealth, Polonization in western part of country referred to rather small groups of colonists, like Bambsi in Greater Poland. Partitions. Polonization also occurred during times when a Polish state didn't exist. Despite the empires that partition Poland applied the policies aimed at reversing the past gains of Polonization or aimed at replacing Polish identity and or eradication of Polish national group. The Polonization took place in the early years of the Prussian partition, where, as a reaction to the persecution of Roman Catholicism during the Kulturkampf, German Catholics living in areas with a Polish majority voluntarily integrated themselves within Polish society, affecting approximately 100,000 Germans in the eastern provinces of Prussia. According to some scholars, the biggest successes in Polonization of the non-Polish lands of former Commonwealth were achieved after the partitions. In times of persecution of Polishness, Mitrofandowna Zapolsky. Paradoxically, the substantial eastward movement of the Polish ethnic territory and growth of the Polish ethnic regions were taking place exactly in the period of the strongest Russian attack on everything Polish in Lithuania and Belarus. The general outline of causes for that is considered to include the activities of the Roman Catholic Church and the cultural influence exacted by the big cities on these lands, the activities of the Vilna educational district in 19th century 1820s, the activities of the local administration, still controlled by the local Polish or already Polonized nobility up to the 1863 to 1864 January uprising, secret schools in second half 19th to the beginning of the 20th century and the influence of the land estates. Following the demise of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the end of the 18th century, the Polonization trends initially continued in Lithuania, Belarus and Polish-dominated parts of Ukraine as the initially liberal policies of the empire gave the Polish elite significant concessions in the local affairs. Dovna Zapolsky notes that the Polonization actually intensified under the liberal rule of Alexander I, particularly due to the efforts of Polish intellectuals who led the Vilnius University, which was organized in 1802 to 1803 from the Academy in Vilna, vastly expanded and given the highest imperial status under the new name Vilna Imperial University. By the Emperor's order, the Vilna Education District, overseen by Adam Czartoryski, a personal friend of Alexander, was greatly expanded to include the vast territories in the west of the Russian Empire stretching to Kiev in southeast and much of the Polish territory, and the development of the university, which had no rival in the whole district, received the highest priority of the imperial authorities, which granted it significant significant freedom and autonomy, with the effort of Polish intellectuals who served the rectors of the university, Hieronym Stronowski, Jan Niedecki, Szymon Malewski, as well as Czartoryski, who oversaw them. The university became the center of Polish patriotism and culture, and as the only university of the district, the center attracted the young nobility of all ethnicities from this extensive region. With time, the traditional Latin was fully eliminated from the university, and by 1816 it was fully replaced by Polish and Russian. This change both affected and reflected a profound change in the Belarusian and Lithuanian secondary school systems, where Latin was also traditionally used, as the university was the main source of the teachers for these schools. Additionally, the university was responsible for the textbook selection, and only Polish textbooks were approved for printing and usage. Downa Zapolski notes that the 1800s-1810s had seen the unprecedented prosperity of the Polish culture and language in the former Great Duchy of Lithuania lands, and this era has seen the effective completion of the Polonization of the smallest nobility, with further reduction of the area of use of the contemporary Belarusian language. Also noting that the Polonization trend had been complemented with the anti-Russian and anti-Orthodox trends. The results of these trends are best reflected in the ethnic censuses in previously non-Polish territories. Following the Polish November uprising aimed at breaking away from Russia, the imperial policies finally changed abruptly. The university was forcibly closed in 1832, and the following years were characterized by the policies aimed at the assimilationist solution of the Polish question. The trend that was further strengthened following another unsuccessful January uprising in the 19th century. The mostly unchallenged Polonization trend of the previous centuries had been met staunchly by then anti-Polish Russification policy, with temporary successes on both sides, like Polonization rises in mid-1850s and in 1880s, and Russification strengthenings in 1830s and in 1860s. Any Polonization of the East and West territories occurred in the situation where Poles had steadily diminishing influence on the government. Partition of Poland posed a genuine threat to the continuation of Polish language culture in those regions, as Polonization was centered around Polish culture. Policies aimed at weakening and destroying it had a significant impact on weakening Polonization of those regions. This was particularly visible in Russian-occupied Poland, where the Polish culture fared worst, as Russian administration gradually became strongly anti-Polish. After a brief and relatively liberal early period in the early 19th century, where Poland was allowed to retain some autonomy as the Congress Poland puppet state, the situation for Polish culture steadily worsened.